The year was 1975, a time when Oregon's wilderness still felt untouched, ancient, and endlessly deep. The mountains in the northern region were so thick with cedar and fir that sunlight rarely reached the forest floor. People who lived nearby said the woods had secrets, old ones. Hunters spoke of strange silhouettes. Ranchers heard distant calls they could not explain, and nighttime travelers sometimes felt eyes watching them from unseen places. Henry Carter wasn't the type of man who cared much for stories or legends. He had grown up working in the timber industry, living in small cabins with a rotating workforce of rugged men who cared only about trees, tools, and weather. Henry was quiet, steady, and more comfortable with nature than with people. He could hike for hours without feeling lonely. He remembered every ridge, every creek, and every animal track like someone else remembered city streets. That autumn, Henry had been asked to scout a new trail for equipment vehicles. Logging routes needed to be ahead of winter, and Henry was one of the few men trusted to explore remote terrain alone. He had packed a simple lunch, a compass, and a field notebook. The morning had begun with birdsong and cool mist that clung to his jacket as he moved between towering trunks. For hours, the forest was silent except for the rhythm of his boots through fallen leaves. It was almost noon when something unusual happened. The air shifted. The forest grew still, as if listening. No birdsong, no rustling, no squirrels chattering. Henry paused, noticing that strange quietness. Then he heard it, a soft whimper, sharp, faint, and unmistakably alive. Henry frowned. It didn't sound like an animal. Not a coyote pup, not a raccoon. It sounded fragile, more like an infant. No child could possibly be this far into the wilderness. There were no camps or houses anywhere nearby. Henry listened again, and the whimper came a second time, followed by a thin, muffled cry. Henry felt something tug inside him. Instinct, perhaps responsibility, perhaps simple human concern. Without hesitation, he left the planned survey route and stepped off the slope, following the sound. Branches bent across his chest. Ferns brushed his legs. The ground became uneven, slick with moss and exposed roots. But the cries drew him deeper. He moved carefully down a narrow ravine where sunlight barely reached the ground. Thick ferns blocked his view, so Henry crouched and pushed them aside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Lying near a fallen log was the body of a massive creature unlike any animal Henry had ever seen. It was slumped on its back, arms limp, chest partially exposed to the cold air. It was unmistakably female, broad hips, rounded abdomen, limbs longer and thicker than any human's. Her entire body was covered in dense brown hair, matted by damp leaves and earth, but her face had structure, broad brow, wide cheekbones, and an expression frozen in pain. Henry's heart pounded. His first instinct was disbelief. This was no bear. Bears did not have hands shaped like human hands, nor feet like this. She was enormous, perhaps 8 feet tall as she stood upright, and yet her features were too closely aligned with humanity to dismiss as simple wildlife. She was not sleeping. She was dead. Henry's breath caught. Death in the woods wasn't rare. Animals died all the time, but this felt different. The stillness around her was heavier than ordinary silence, as though the forest mourned. Then Henry heard it again. A weak, desperate cry. He stepped closer with slow caution. His eyes scanned the mother's torso, and there, almost hidden beneath the length of her arm and thick fur, was a tiny creature curled on her chest. A newborn, small enough to fit in both Henry's hands. Its body was covered in silky dark hair, finer than the mother's, with delicate fingers gripping the fur of her breast. The child's eyes were closed tight, its mouth opening in short, breathless cries. The mother had not died long ago. Henry could see signs that childbirth had taken her life. There was dried blood around her lower abdomen, torn fur, and clear physical trauma. She must have fought alone through labor, with no tribe or mate nearby. The baby had been born alive into a world already losing its only protection. Henry bowed his head, without meaning to. The sight was heartbreaking. Newborn animals were inherently vulnerable, but this child was more than an animal. It had a face remarkably similar to a human infant, expressive and helpless. Henry searched for predators. Bears sometimes scavenged dead bodies. Wolves might be close. The baby would survive neither cold nor hunger nor predators for more than an hour. Henry felt himself trembling. What should he do? He knew exactly what would happen if he reported this. Government officials would swarm the area. They would take the child into laboratories, cages, experiments, cameras, dissection tables. The corpse of the mother would be dissected, photographed, and displayed like a scientific miracle. Hunters might swarm the forest for trophies. The mountains would become a battleground between curiosity and violence. Henry's instincts screamed that the forest did not need another invasion. But the infant was still alive. It weakly clung to its mother's chest, crying for warmth, unaware that its mother's body was cold and unresponsive. Henry knelt beside them, his voice shaky. "You poor little thing." He reached out and gently lifted the infant. The baby was surprisingly warm, breathing in tiny gasps, body trembling. As soon as Henry held it close to his shirt, the child quieted. It did not resist. It simply leaned into his heartbeat as though desperate for comfort. Henry suffered a deep moment of dread. He could not leave it. He could not expose it. He could not explain its existence to anyone, not law enforcement, not forestry management, not other loggers. Only one path was possible: take the child home and protect it. No one else could be trusted. Henry wrapped his coat around the baby and walked away from the ravine, promising himself one thing: not one soul will hear about this unless I choose it. The hike back to the cabin felt painfully long. Every rustle in the trees made Henry fear pursuit, though no predator appeared. When he opened the cabin door, Martha, his wife of 20 years, stared at him blankly. What on earth? Henry laid the newborn on a blanket near the fire. Martha knelt instinctively, studying the child with wide, trembling eyes. "Henry, is that a human?" "No," he whispered. "But it's no beast either." Martha gently touched the baby's hand. It responded like a human infant, gripping her finger with surprising strength. Martha looked at the child, then at Henry. "If we don't keep it, it dies?" Henry nodded. "And if we tell anyone, the world will tear it apart." Martha slowly exhaled. "Then God has placed this child in our care." Henry took her hand, overwhelmed. "We are its family now." Outside, unseen among the trees, something enormous shifted in the darkness, watching silently, grieving silently, but not approaching. Henry did not yet know it, but the forest had already marked him as protector. A life had been saved, and nothing in his world would ever be the same again. Raising the infant was nothing like raising a human child, yet everything about it felt familiar to Martha. She fed him warm goat milk with a tiny medicine dropper, then later with a handmade wooden spoon. She discovered early that he preferred warmth against skin rather than blankets alone, so she wrapped him inside her coat and rocked him by the fire for hours. The little one made soft chirps, humming sounds, and at night he curled under her chin the same way an orphan fawn once had. Henry built a makeshift cradle using thick furs and cedar branches, but the infant preferred sleeping against Martha's heartbeat. The bond formed quickly, naturally, and intensely. By the end of the first month, the child recognized her scent, her footsteps, and her voice. When she left the room, he whimpered until she returned. They named him Eli because giving him a name helped them love him without fear. Eli grew astonishingly fast. Within the first year, he reached the size of a small human toddler. By age 2, he was nearly the height and strength of an 8-year-old child, though his emotional development was younger. His hair thickened, his limbs lengthened, and his grip became powerful enough to tear tree bark or crack walnuts with bare fingers. Henry would shake his head every time Eli lifted something far beyond ordinary human strength. But strength was never an issue with behavior. There was not a molecule of violence in the child. He was tender, observant, sensitive. When Martha's chickens fell ill from cold weather, Eli sat beside them for hours, humming soft tones like lullabies, as though trying to offer comfort. If a goat wandered too far, Eli would lead it home by gently holding its horn. His sensitivity to suffering, human or animal, was unlike anything Henry had ever seen. From the beginning, Eli learned faster than any human toddler. He understood gestures before words. He could mimic sounds precisely, including the creak of doors, the whistle of kettles, the call of ravens. At 18 months, he began understanding basic commands. When Martha said, "Give me the cup," Eli handed it over. When Henry said, "Stay inside," Eli nodded and obeyed. He communicated with wide, expressive eyes, soft grunts, and hand signs his own invention. Speech came later, thick and slow, his voice deep even as a child. Eli could say mama, papa, yes, and hungry, though spoken words were rarely needed. His intelligence was not measured in language. It was measured in awareness. Henry saw it the first time Eli stood by a window during a storm. The child stared into lightning, as if understanding the world was alive. One autumn afternoon, Henry and Eli walked through the backyard, gathering fallen apples. Eli lifted an entire broken stump, as if it were a dry branch. Henry laughed despite himself. "You're stronger every day." Eli looked confused, as though unsure whether strength should be praised. Henry ruffled his hair. "Strength is only dangerous if you use it without kindness." Eli repeated slowly, "Kindness." Henry nodded. "Exactly. And you already have that." The woods around the cabin were remote, but not empty. Ranchers visited occasionally, and hunters sometimes passed through. Henry began to feel uneasy. As Eli grew, so did the risk. His silhouette alone, tall, muscular, covered in hair, would terrify anyone who didn't understand. By age 5, Eli was strong enough to run through the forest like a blur, climbing trees faster than Henry could blink. If startled, he disappeared soundlessly. His senses were far beyond human. Smell, hearing, night vision. He could detect a stranger from half a mile away just by scent. That was a blessing, but it was also a warning. Henry taught Eli one rule more strict than any other. If you hear voices you do not know, hide. If you see headlights, hide. If humans come near, go into the deeper woods. Eli learned quickly. He could smell perfume from a half-mile away and would slip silently into the trees like mist. Henry recorded everything secretly in leather-bound journals. Eli's diet, growth, cognition, emotional reactions, vocal patterns, tool use, and even his grief responses. Henry had never planned to become a scientist, but he understood that someday the truth might matter, not for fame, but for Eli's protection. Then new problems began. Neighbors started whispering. One cattle rancher swore he saw a hairy boy near the ridge at dusk, running too fast for a human. A hunter claimed he heard eerie howling that wasn't wolf or cougar. A family camping near the river heard heavy steps around their tent at night. Rumors grew. A wild child lived near the Carter property. Nobody knew what species. Nobody knew if it was human or animal. Nobody had proof. Henry became more cautious. He only let Eli outside at dusk or dawn. He hid Eli's footprints by sweeping soil or raking leaves. Eli learned to walk on stones near the waterline to avoid leaving tracks. His instincts were astonishing, almost as though secrecy was part of his biology. Despite Henry's fears, there were magical moments too. Each winter, Eli became restless. He stood at the edge of the woods, breathing deeply, as if sensing voices in the distance. The first time Henry heard them, goosebumps rose along his arms. Soft rhythmic whistles, distant and layered, like a language made of birdsong, wind, and heartbeat. Eli answered, not perfectly, but instinctively. 3 soft hums, 1 whistle, then a high rising tone. Henry felt his throat tighten. Eli wasn't learning from humans. He was remembering something older than memory. Henry realized the impossible. Eli was communicating with his own kind. Henry did not panic. Instead, he prepared for the day Eli would need to meet them. He loved Eli deeply like a son, but he understood something bigger. No matter how human Eli behaved, he belonged to a people hidden somewhere beyond ridges and waterfalls. One spring morning, Henry woke to find Eli sitting beside the chicken coop, holding a young hen that had died during the night. Eli rocked her gently, humming mournfully, as though saying goodbye. Tears streamed down his face. His grief was raw and human. Henry sat beside him. Sadness means love, son. Eli leaned against him silently. By age 10, Eli was far larger than any human teenager. Broad chest, powerful limbs, and a calm, almost monk-like presence. He spent more time in the forest, not to separate from Henry, but to feel belonging among trees. Sometimes Henry would wake up to see Eli sitting outside under moonlight, staring into distant valleys, as though he felt a tribe calling him softly. One evening, Henry made a bold decision. He packed a small satchel, took Eli's hand, and walked deep into the mountains. They traveled for 2 days, sleeping beneath trees, crossing streams, following no trail. Henry trusted instinct more than compass now. On the second night, Eli stopped. The forest felt alive. There, between the cedars, stood 3 enormous figures. Taller than Eli, broader, silhouettes shaped like shadows made of fur and breath. Their eyes glowed faintly beneath moonlight. Eli trembled. Then, without fear, he stepped forward. He let out a soft cry, half sob, half longing. The largest figure stepped closer and knelt. Eli pressed his forehead against the elder's chest, and the elder wrapped massive arms around him, holding him like a father would hold a son. Henry wept quietly. Eli had found his tribe, but when dawn came and Henry whispered, "Do you want to stay with them?" Eli looked at the tribe, and then looked back at Henry. His voice was soft but clear. No. Henry could hardly breathe. Eli stayed, not because Henry was safer, but because love was stronger than belonging. For now, time moved softly in the Carter cabin, measured in seasons, not calendars. Eli had grown into a being both majestic and humble. He divided his life between the forest and the cabin, hunting small game with surprising delicacy, harvesting berries and wild roots, and bringing them home in woven baskets he made from willow branches. He communicated more clearly every year, speaking slow English with a deep, resonant voice, but he still preferred silence and expression over long sentences. Henry grew older. His hair turned silver, knees stiffened in winter, and his lungs occasionally wheezed after long walks. Martha aged too, but her strength persisted. Even in grief for children she never had except Eli. Time had been kind to all of them, until it wasn't. One cold November morning, Henry collapsed while chopping wood. Martha screamed, and Eli rushed in from the trees, lifting Henry as if he weighed nothing, then laying him gently inside on the sofa. Henry's breathing was shallow, his forehead pale, his voice thin. Martha sent for the only doctor who visited isolated ranch families, a man named Dr. Reed. After listening to Henry's chest, checking his pulse, and studying his exhaustion, the doctor spoke quietly to Martha. Henry's heart was failing. He didn't have months or years. He had days, maybe weeks, depending on rest and peace. Henry shut his eyes, absorbing the truth. Not fear, acceptance. Eli stood frozen beside the wall, gripping a wooden stool so tightly it splintered. He understood death. He had witnessed it among forest animals and among members of his tribe during winters of sickness and hunger. But this death felt unbearable because Henry was not just protector, he was father. That night, Henry called Eli to his bedside. Eli knelt beside him, head lowered, shoulders trembling, massive hands folded like a child afraid to break something precious. Henry whispered, voice dry and cracked, "Son, listen to me." Eli's eyes filled instantly, voice shaking. "No, no, Papa, stay." Henry smiled faintly. "Death is part of my road now. Yours will be different, longer, deeper." Eli buried his face against Henry's hand, letting out a soft, keening sound, the sound Bigfoot tribes used to mourn. Martha covered her mouth, silenced by heartbreak. Henry stroked Eli's thick hair slowly. "I need to tell the world about you, not to expose you, not to hurt you, but to protect your kind when I'm gone. If humans never understand you exist, they have no reason to protect forests. They will cut everything down, tear up valleys, poison rivers, and your people will die unseen." Eli shook his head violently. "Humans bad. They hunt. They fear." Henry coughed and rested a moment. "Not all humans, son. I cannot promise safety, but truth is the only chance for future generations of your kind." Eli wiped Henry's tears with his thumbs. "I stay. I protect. I fight." Henry smiled at his innocence. "There will be a day when I'm gone and Martha is gone, and someone else must keep your story alive. You can't fight alone forever. The world needs to know you are not monsters, that you are guardians, caretakers, living families with love and grief and purpose. Eli stared at Henry, torn between instinctive secrecy and human loyalty. His tribe lived hidden for thousands of years, never interfering in human affairs except to avoid danger. But Henry had always been different. Gentle, patient, honest. Nothing like the human hunters Eli remembered from childhood stories whispered through the woods. Henry spent the next 2 weeks writing. Martha brought him notebooks, ink, sharpened pencils. He filled page after page with details. Eli's birth, how he found a dead mother, the medical conditions indicating childbirth, Eli's infant growth, emotional development, his intelligence, vocal abilities, tool-making, empathy, physical attributes, dietary habits, and tribe behavior. Henry added sketches, accurate, detailed drawings of Eli at different ages, footprints, handprints, behavioral patterns, and signs used for communication. He added sound observations too, whistles, hums, forest calls, and how tribes exchanged information from miles apart using steady tones that echoed like distant waterfalls. Henry also described the day Eli met his tribe, the emotional reunion, and the silent respect between creatures who live without written language but carried thousands of years of memory. Henry wrote about forest stewardship, how Bigfoot herds guided deer, buried corpses of animals, blocked forest fires by relocating fallen timber, scared hunters off breeding grounds, and tracked predators to maintain ecological balance. Henry recorded moments that no scientist had ever witnessed, acts not of survival, but of responsibility. Each night, Eli sat on the floor by Henry's bed, sometimes holding Henry's hand while he wrote, sometimes humming soft tones that eased the pain. Eli rarely left the cabin except to bring fresh water or gather herbs from Martha. He understood that Henry needed presence, not solitude. One late evening, Henry's voice weakened further. "Martha, come closer." She and Eli leaned in. "When I die, take these journals to the authorities. The government must have them, not hunters, not news reporters. Only the National Archive or Scientific Bureau. Make sure someone official reads them. It won't change the world immediately, but someday, after I'm gone, a person with conscience will protect Eli's people." Martha nodded silently. Henry turned his gaze to Eli. "Promise me you will survive. Promise me you won't submit to fear or revenge. Promise me you will love your tribe and protect the forest with wisdom." Eli placed a massive hand on Henry's chest, voice trembling. "I promise." Henry's final days were peaceful but full of grief. The tribe appeared around the cabin at night, silhouettes barely visible between trees, offering presents like a vigil. They never entered the yard, never looked inside the windows, but their closeness felt like a spiritual blanket. They mourned for Henry long before he died. On the final morning, light filtered through lace curtains, soft and gold. Henry drifted between sleep and waking, and when he opened his eyes, Eli was kneeling beside him, stroking his arm with childlike tenderness. Henry whispered, "Thank you for giving me purpose." Eli cried openly, face pressed into Henry's chest. Henry placed one last kiss on Eli's head and looked at Martha with deep peace. "I'm ready." Henry's breathing slowed, his eyes softened, and with Eli's enormous hands holding his own, Henry Carter passed from the world with love on both sides of him. Eli screamed with grief, not rage. His cries echoed through the forest like a storm. Every animal went silent. The tribe stood motionless outside the cabin, bowing their heads. That night, they buried Henry beneath a cedar tree behind the cabin. Eli dug the grave himself, hands steady, tears falling silently into the earth. Martha placed Henry's favorite hat on the coffin. 2 Bigfoot elders stood like guardians, their presence reverent. Eli placed stones over the grave, one at a time, singing a low mourning song known only among his people. He stayed at Henry's burial site until dawn. Then he disappeared into the forest for months, carrying grief like a shadow. Martha never tried to stop him. She understood grief must breathe in wilderness, not walls. 50 years passed like a quiet river carving its way through stone. Henry's cabin became weathered, abandoned, then overgrown. Moss spread along the roof, Blackberry vines claimed the porch, and winter snows softened the sharp edges of the old lumber. The cedar tree under which Henry was buried grew tall and straight, as if guarding its roots like a precious secret. After Henry's death, Eli rarely returned to the cabin until Martha fell ill in her later years. When her strength began to fade, Eli came silently one night, stepping to the back door like a shadow returning home. He stayed beside Martha for months, gathering herbs from deep forest valleys, bathing her feet in warm water, humming to soothe her pain when medicine failed. He lifted her to watch sunsets, fed her soups when she couldn't hold a spoon, and stayed awake through cold nights so she would never feel alone. When Martha passed, Eli held her body the way a grieving son would hold his mother. He buried her beside Henry under the cedar tree, placing wildflowers and woven leaves atop her grave. Eli stayed until dawn, whispering to the earth as if speaking to Martha's spirit. Then he left the cabin for good. The world outside changed. Highways were built, towns expanded, logging companies vanished, ranches transformed into summer resorts. Technology arrived everywhere, even into mountains, cell towers, drones, trail cameras, backpacking tourists, amateur cryptozoologists seeking blurry footage. But Eli and his tribe remained unseen. They evolved around human intrusion, the way rivers bend around stone. Eli matured into a wise elder within his tribe, though his life was very different from others. He was fluent in silence and scent, like every member of his species, but he carried something more: human memory, human attachment, human grief. He understood language, empathy, music, and emotional nuance in ways his tribe recognized as rare. Eli became a bridge, one who could understand two worlds without belonging entirely to either. When campfires burned deep in the mountains, the tribe often sat in a circle, listening to Eli retell stories of Henry and Martha. He remembered Henry's steady hands guiding him through childhood fears, Martha's warmth like sunlight, and the wooden cabin where he first felt protected. He carved shapes from cedar bark, faces familiar to him alone, small likenesses of Henry and Martha, which he placed in hollow trees like personal shrines. Years turned into decades. Climate changed. Droughts threatened streams. Wildfires swept across mountain ranges more fiercely than Eli remembered as a child. Tribes of Bigfoot migrated into deeper, less reachable valleys to escape human recreational areas. Some species of birds disappeared entirely. Wolves grew fewer. Many nights, Eli stood on high ridges listening to distant chainsaws and machinery and wondered whether his father's words would eventually come true, whether forests would be destroyed not by malice, but by blindness. Meanwhile, the journals Henry wrote sat sealed in a government archive. No one had opened them in nearly half a century, until one winter morning, a young archivist named Daniel Carter, researching his family tree, discovered that his great-uncle Henry had left restricted documents. Daniel had inherited the Carter surname through distant cousins. The cabin, the property, and the grave site were part of historical land records. Curious and stubborn by nature, Daniel petitioned the archive to view the forgotten files. At first, he was allowed only to see a summary, then the photographs, then the hand-drawn sketches, then Henry's confession. Daniel did not doubt a word. His hands shook while turning the pages, not because Henry might have been lying, but because he sensed the journals were truth, written not for fame or drama, but for love. Daniel arranged for temporary release of the files under special review, stating he was compiling material for ecological research. He did not go to the media. He went straight to the FBI, because Henry had requested those journals belong to official record, not public circus. At the regional field office in Washington State, Daniel met with two agents early one morning. He spread the items across a conference table. Dozens of journals, photographs of Eli as a child, notes on language behavior, and a compact tape recorder. The agent stared, skeptical but uneasy. Daniel pressed play. Henry's recorded voice filled the room, aged, slow, tired, yet deliberate. "This is my testimony, recorded in the year 1999. I found a newborn Bigfoot on the chest of its dead mother in 1975. I raised him secretly, named him Eli, and he lived with my wife and me for more than 20 years. He is intelligent, compassionate, emotional, and peaceful. He has a tribe who protects the balance of wilderness without harming mankind. If mankind ever harms them, we will lose the last true guardians of untouched forests. Silence swallowed the room. The agent stared at Daniel. Where is this? Eli, one asked cautiously. Daniel smiled a little. Alive. Well, living deep in the Cascades. He knows English. He remembers Henry. The agents almost laughed before they noticed Daniel's expression was not playful. It was reverent. Are you suggesting we meet him? The other agent asked. Daniel nodded. Under one condition, neutrality. No weapons. No extraction plans. No tagging. No capturing. No pursuit. You will meet him as a guest. Nothing more. The FBI hesitated, but the proof was too overwhelming to dismiss as folklore. After several classified approvals, 2 agents were permitted to accompany Daniel under guidance. It took 3 days of hiking through sweeping valleys, across icy rivers, and up hidden trails that no GPS could track. The agents were exhausted, their feet blistered, and nerves frayed from endless isolation. On the 3rd night, Daniel built a fire and sat quietly. He told the agents, "When Eli decides you're ready, he will come." The forest was silent. Then a heavy but graceful step sounded beyond the tree line. Branches parted. A massive figure emerged, 8 feet tall, fur thick and silver at the edges with age. His presence was not terrifying, but dignified. His gaze was gentle, reflective, full of memory. Eli. The agents froze, unable to move or speak. Eli stepped closer to the fire, sitting with deliberate calm, legs folded like a monk. The firelight made his fur glow copper and gold. His eyes, human in depth but ancient in wisdom, studied the agents with sorrow, not threat. Then Eli spoke in slow, resonant English. Henry was my father. Martha was my mother. The agents went pale. Eli continued, voice rich with grief and gratitude. They gave me life when the world would have let me die. Daniel wiped his eyes quietly. Eli pointed toward the mountains. My tribe keeps the forest alive. We do not hunt humans. We do not invade towns. We guard the balance. If humans destroy forests, my people disappear, and with us, the last memory of wilderness. The agents whispered, You think. Eli nodded. We feel. We remember. We protect. We mourn. He looked at Daniel. Henry promised the story would not die when he did. Daniel nodded. I'm here to keep that promise. Eli lifted a smooth river stone, polished by years of water, and placed it in Daniel's palm. For Henry. Then Eli stood, towering but peaceful. Before disappearing into trees, he said softly, Tell your people, leave us unseen. Protect what we protect. If forest falls silent, mankind will be next. And he was gone, not vanished like magic, just moved with silence deeper than shadow. The agents stared after him for nearly an hour. None of them slept. When they returned to Washington, the FBI locked the case under high secrecy, not to exploit, but to protect. No hunts, no publicity, no laboratories, just silence, a promise between 2 species. Eli still roams the mountains today, not as a myth, but as a guardian who remembers love. And somewhere under the cedar tree, Henry Carter rests peacefully, knowing the secret he carried for 50 years did not die with him. It lived,